Elvis was halfway through Love Me Tender when something made him stop cold. He put down his microphone, walked to the edge of the stage, and stared at a 7-year-old boy in the third row who was crying quietly among thousands of screaming fans. The arena slowly went silent as everyone wondered what was happening. Then Elvis said 5 words that nobody could explain. "Your father just died, didn't he?" 18,000 people held their breath. The boy's mother let out a scream that echoed through the arena, because the father had died of a heart attack that very morning, just 4 hours before the concert. Elvis had never met this family. He had no information about them, no way of knowing. Yet somehow he knew. This is the story of the most unexplainable moment in Elvis Presley's career. The moment that made his band members question what they'd witnessed. The moment that psychologists, parapsychologists, and grief counselors are still trying to explain half a century later. How did Elvis know? And what does this tell us about the invisible connections between human beings in moments of profound loss? It was June 19, 1976, at the Spectrum Arena in Philadelphia. Elvis was in the middle of his summer tour, performing 2 shows a night in cities across America. By this point in his career, Elvis had performed thousands of concerts. He'd seen every kind of fan reaction imaginable: screaming teenagers, fainting women, crying men, marriage proposals thrown on stage, people bringing their babies to be blessed. Elvis thought he'd experienced everything an audience could throw at him, but nothing had prepared him for what was about to happen that Saturday night in Philadelphia. The Spectrum was packed with 18,000 fans who'd paid good money to see the king of rock and roll. The energy was electric as Elvis opened with C.C. Rider, segueing into a medley of his greatest hits. The band was tight, Elvis's voice was strong, everything was going exactly as planned. In the third row, center section, sat 7-year-old Marcus Williams and his mother, Patricia. If you'd looked at them from a distance, you might not have noticed anything unusual. Just another mother and son enjoying a concert. But if you'd looked closer, you would have seen the redness around Patricia's eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she held her purse, the way Marcus sat very still, not bouncing or singing along like the other children around him, but just staring at Elvis with an intensity that seemed almost desperate. Because 4 hours earlier, at 2:47 that afternoon, Patricia's husband and Marcus's father, Thomas Williams, had died of a massive heart attack in their living room. He was 36 years old. Thomas had been watching a baseball game on television when it happened. One moment he was cheering for the Phillies, and the next moment he was clutching his chest, his face going pale, his breath coming in short gasps. Patricia had called 911 immediately, but by the time the ambulance arrived, Thomas was gone. The paramedics tried to revive him. They worked on him for 20 minutes, right there in the living room, while Marcus watched from the doorway, too scared to move, too young to fully understand what was happening. When the paramedics finally stopped, when they pulled the sheet over Thomas's face, Patricia had let out a sound that Marcus would never forget. A wail of grief so deep and primal that it didn't sound human. It sounded like something breaking, something that could never be put back together. In the hours that followed, Patricia moved through the necessary motions like a robot. She called her sister. She called Thomas's parents. She made arrangements for the funeral home to come and take the body. And through all of it, Marcus sat on the stairs, silent and still, clutching the Elvis concert tickets that his father had given him just 2 days earlier. Thomas had been so excited to take Marcus to this concert. He'd been an Elvis fan since he was a teenager, and passing that love on to his son had been one of his greatest joys. Father and son would dance around the living room to Elvis records, using hairbrushes as microphones, making Patricia laugh with their elaborate performances. The tickets had been Thomas's birthday gift to Marcus, who had turned 7 just a week earlier. 2 tickets, father and son, a special night they'd both been counting down to for months. When Patricia's sister Diane arrived at the house to help with arrangements, she found Marcus still sitting on the stairs, still holding the tickets. "Honey," Diane said gently, "those tickets are for tonight. You know you can't go now, right? Your daddy just died. We need to stay here. We need to make arrangements." But Marcus looked up at his aunt with eyes that were dry but haunted, and he said something that broke everyone's heart. "Daddy would want us to go. He'd be sad if we didn't go." Patricia, overhearing this from the other room, felt something crack open inside her chest. Her son was right. Thomas would have wanted them to go. He would have insisted on it. Thomas had always believed that life should be lived fully, that joy should be grabbed whenever possible, that music was medicine for the soul. Even in death, even in the depths of grief, Thomas would have wanted his son to see Elvis. So, in a decision that some family members would later criticize as inappropriate, even disrespectful, Patricia made a choice. She and Marcus would go to the concert, not because she wanted to, not because she thought she could enjoy it, but because her husband would have wanted it, because her son needed it, because sometimes the only way to honor the dead is to keep living. She didn't tell anyone outside the immediate family where they were going. She didn't want to deal with the judgment, the concerned looks, the well-meaning people who would tell her she was making a mistake. She simply got Marcus cleaned up, got herself presentable enough to appear in public, and drove to the Spectrum Arena with her dead husband's tickets clutched in her hand. "Marcus, please don't tell anyone what happened," Patricia said as they pulled into the parking lot. "Not tonight. We'll deal with everything tomorrow. Tonight, we're just going to watch Elvis, okay? Like Daddy wanted." Marcus nodded solemnly. He understood in the way that children sometimes understand adult things without fully grasping them, that this was important, that they were doing something significant by being here. They made their way to their seats just as the opening act was finishing. The tickets Thomas had bought were excellent seats, third row center, close enough to see Elvis's face clearly, close enough to feel like part of the show. As they sat down, Patricia realized she'd made a terrible mistake. Being here, surrounded by joy and celebration and music, only highlighted the enormous hole that had just been torn in her life. Everyone around her was happy. Everyone around her was excited, and she was hollow. Empty, going through the motions of being alive while feeling completely dead inside. Marcus sat beside her, small and still, his hands folded in his lap. Other children around them were bouncing in their seats, waving signs, wearing Elvis t-shirts. But Marcus just sat there, staring at the empty stage, waiting. When Elvis finally appeared and the crowd erupted into screams, Marcus didn't scream. When Elvis sang "CC Rider" and "CC Rider," and thousands of people sang along, Marcus didn't sing. He just watched, and slowly, quietly, tears began rolling down his cheeks. Not the dramatic, attention-seeking tears of a child throwing a tantrum, but the silent, devastating tears of a child who has lost something irreplaceable and doesn't know how to process it. Patricia noticed the tears but didn't say anything. What could she say? She was crying too, silent tears that she wiped away quickly, hoping no one around them would notice. Elvis moved through his set with his characteristic energy and charisma. He was wearing a white jumpsuit with a high collar and elaborate jeweled designs that caught the stage lights and threw rainbows across the audience. His voice was powerful, his movements still graceful, despite the weight he'd gained in recent years. The audience was loving every second of it. But then, about 45 minutes into the show, something changed. Elvis was in the middle of "Love Me Tender," one of his most famous ballads, a song he'd performed thousands of times. He was singing directly to the audience, making eye contact with fans in the front rows, giving them that intimate connection that made everyone feel like he was singing just for them. "Love me tender, love me true, all my dreams fulfill." And then he stopped, just stopped singing, right in the middle of a verse. His mouth closed, his eyes fixed on something in the third row. The band kept playing for a few bars, expecting Elvis to come back in, but when he didn't, they gradually stopped too. One by one, the instruments fell silent until there was nothing but confused murmurs from the crowd and the hum of the amplifiers. Elvis stood at the center of the stage, completely still, staring at Marcus Williams. Everyone in the arena started looking around, trying to figure out what had captured Elvis's attention. What was happening? Was this part of the show? Was Elvis having some kind of medical emergency? The confusion rippled through the crowd like a wave. Charlie Hodge, Elvis's longtime guitarist and friend, stepped closer to Elvis and whispered, "You okay, man?" But Elvis didn't respond. He was focused entirely on this small boy in the third row, who was crying quiet tears while everyone around him screamed and celebrated. Elvis put his microphone down on the piano behind him and walked to the very edge of the stage. He crouched down, getting as close to the audience as the physical separation would allow, and he looked directly at Marcus, the spotlight operator. Unsure what was happening, but following Elvis's lead, swung the spotlight to illuminate the section where Elvis was looking. Suddenly, Marcus and Patricia were bathed in bright white light, visible to everyone in the arena. Patricia felt her heart start to race. What was happening? Why was Elvis looking at them? Had Marcus done something wrong? Was Elvis upset that her son was crying instead of cheering? Elvis's face was serious, intense, not the jovial showman face he usually wore during concerts. He looked like a man who had seen something that troubled him deeply. He beckoned with his hand, a small gesture, inviting Marcus to come closer to the stage. Marcus looked at his mother, uncertain. Patricia, equally uncertain, gave a small nod. What else could she do? Security guards appeared to help Marcus navigate to the very front, right up against the stage. Elvis knelt at the edge, bringing himself down to Marcus's eye level. The entire arena was silent now. 18,000 people watching this strange, intimate moment unfold. Elvis reached out and very gently wiped a tear from Marcus's cheek. His hand was large and ring-adorned, gentle against the small boy's face. "Son," Elvis said quietly, but his microphone, still clipped to his jumpsuit, picked up every word and broadcast it through the arena's sound system. "Son, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Okay?" Marcus nodded, unable to speak. "Your father," Elvis said, his voice careful, measured. "Your father just died, didn't he?" The words hung in the air. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed. It was as if the entire universe had stopped to witness this impossible moment. And then Patricia Williams screamed, a short, sharp cry of shock and anguish that pierced the silence like a knife. Marcus's face crumpled. The tears that had been falling quietly now came in great heaving sobs. He nodded, his whole body shaking with the force of his grief. "Yes," he managed to choke out. "This morning. He died this morning." The arena erupted, not with cheers or applause, but with gasps and exclamations of shock. People were turning to each other, trying to make sense of what they'd just heard. How did Elvis know? How could he possibly know? Even Elvis's own band members were standing on stage, with their mouths hanging open, completely stunned. Charlie Hodge would later say in interviews, "I'd known Elvis for over 15 years at that point. I'd seen him do a lot of amazing things, but in that moment, I genuinely questioned whether I was witnessing something supernatural. There was no rational explanation for what had just happened." Elvis didn't hesitate. He immediately gestured for security to bring Marcus up onto the stage. Then he called out to Patricia, "Ma'am, you two, come up here, please." Within moments, both Marcus and Patricia were standing on stage with Elvis Presley in front of 18. Patricia was shaking so hard she'd barely stand. Elvis put his hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "I'm so sorry for your loss," he said, his voice full of genuine compassion. "When did it happen?" "This afternoon," Patricia managed to say through her tears. "Around 3 o'clock. Heart attack." He was only 36. Elvis closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, they were wet with tears. "And you came here anyway?" "Because he would have wanted us to," Patricia said, her voice breaking. "He bought these tickets for our son's birthday. He was so excited, we couldn't not come. He would have wanted us to be here." Elvis turned to address the audience, his arms still around Patricia's shoulders. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Patricia Williams and her son Marcus. Just a few hours ago, Patricia's husband and Marcus's father passed away suddenly. But they came here tonight because that's what he would have wanted, because he loved music, because he believed in living life fully, even in the face of tragedy." The crowd was completely silent, hanging on every word. "I don't know how I knew," Elvis continued. "I can't explain it. But when I looked at this little boy, I just knew. I could feel his grief, like it was my own. And I couldn't keep singing happy love songs while this child was suffering." He turned back to Marcus, kneeling down again. "Your daddy loved you very much to buy you these tickets. And you love him very much to come here tonight, even though you're hurting. That takes courage, son. Real courage." What happened next became one of the most talked about moments in Elvis concert history. Elvis asked Patricia and Marcus to sit on the stage with him while he performed. He brought out 2 chairs and positioned them near the piano. Then he sat down at the piano himself and said to the audience, "I'm going to do something different tonight. I'm going to play some songs for my friend Marcus here, and for his daddy who can't be here to see this show. And I hope all of you will understand that this is more important than any performance I could give." He began to play a slow, gentle version of Amazing Grace. His voice, usually full of power and showmanship, was tender and reverent. The entire arena joined in, 18,000 voices singing together, creating a moment of collective compassion that transcended entertainment and became something spiritual. Marcus sat in his chair, his small body still racked with sobs, but now surrounded by love from 18,000 strangers who were mourning with him. Elvis followed Amazing Grace with How Great Thou Art, another gospel song that he'd always performed with particular passion. As he sang, something remarkable happened. Marcus's crying began to slow. His breathing became more regular. He was still grieving, still devastated, but the music was doing something. It was giving him a container for his grief, a way to express the inexpressible. Patricia, sitting beside her son, felt something similar. For the first time since Thomas died, she felt less alone. This arena full of strangers, led by Elvis Presley himself, was holding space for her grief. They weren't trying to fix it or minimize it. They were simply acknowledging it, honoring it, sharing it. When the songs ended, Elvis stood and helped Marcus to his feet. He pulled the boy into a long hug, and Marcus clung to him like a lifeline. "I want you to know something," Elvis said, still holding Marcus. "Your daddy isn't really gone. He's here right now watching you, proud of how brave you're being. And every time you hear music, every time you sing, that's your daddy right there with you. Music doesn't die. Love doesn't die. People carry on in the hearts of those who love them." Elvis reached into his pocket and pulled out one of his famous scarves, but instead of throwing it into the crowd like he usually did, he carefully wrapped it around Marcus's shoulders. "This is for you," he said. "Whenever you miss your daddy, you hold on to this, and you remember that you're surrounded by love. From him, from your mama, from me, from everyone in this room." Marcus clutched the scarf like it was the most precious thing in the world. Elvis then turned to Patricia and did something even more surprising. He took off one of his rings, a simple gold band that he'd worn for years, and pressed it into her hand. "For your husband," he said quietly, "because he was here tonight too. I could feel him. He was here watching his son, proud of his wife, grateful for the life he had even though it was too short. Patricia couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face, holding the ring that Elvis Presley had just given her as a memorial to her husband. Elvis helped Patricia and Marcus back to their seats, but before they left the stage, he made an announcement. This show tonight is dedicated to Thomas Williams, who loved music, loved his family, and who reminded us all that life is precious and short and should be lived fully. Let's finish this show in his honor. What followed was the most emotionally charged performance of Elvis's career. Every song seemed to carry extra weight, extra meaning. When he sang "Are You Lonesome Tonight?", half the arena was crying. When he sang "My Way", it became an anthem not just for Elvis, but for Thomas Williams and everyone else who'd ever lost someone too soon. The crowd responded with an energy and connection that went beyond typical concert enthusiasm. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was communal healing. This was music doing what it was meant to do, bringing people together in their shared humanity. After the concert, Elvis did something he rarely did. He invited the Williams family backstage to his dressing room. For 30 minutes, he sat with Patricia and Marcus, asking about Thomas, looking at photos Patricia had in her wallet, sharing stories about his own experiences with loss. Elvis told them about losing his twin brother at birth, about how that loss had haunted him his entire life. He talked about losing his mother, Gladys, who had been his closest confidant. "I understand grief," Elvis said. "It never really goes away. You just learn to carry it differently. And music helps. Music is how I process everything. When I'm sad, when I'm happy, when I'm confused, I sing, and it helps." He encouraged Marcus to keep listening to music, to keep dancing and singing just like he'd done with his father. "Your daddy gave you a beautiful gift," Elvis said. "He gave you a love of music. That's something that will sustain you for the rest of your life." Before they left, Elvis arranged for his management to provide the Williams family with tickets to any future Elvis concert they wanted to attend, all expenses paid. He gave them his personal phone number at Graceland and told Patricia to call if she or Marcus ever needed anything. "I mean it," he emphasized. "Don't hesitate. You're part of my family now." Patricia, overwhelmed by the generosity and genuine care, could only thank him through her tears. The story of what happened that night spread quickly. Within days, newspapers across the country were running headlines like "Elvis stops concert after sensing child's grief" and "The King's mysterious knowing." But what the headlines couldn't capture was the profound mystery at the heart of the story. How had Elvis known? How had he looked at one crying child among thousands of fans and immediately, accurately, identified that the child was grieving a death that had just occurred that day? Charlie Hodge was asked about it in dozens of interviews over the years that followed. Every time his answer was the same: "I have no explanation. Elvis didn't have any information about that family. Security hadn't told him anything. There was no way for him to know. But he knew. It was like he could see into that child's soul and recognize the specific quality of fresh grief." Other band members corroborated Charlie's account. James Burton, Elvis's lead guitarist, said, "I've seen Elvis connect with audiences in amazing ways. He had incredible intuition about people. But this was different. This was something beyond intuition. It was like he could see something the rest of us couldn't see." Joe Esposito, Elvis's road manager, admitted, "It spooked me, honestly. For a while after that night, I started wondering if Elvis had abilities that none of us understood." How else do you explain what happened? Parapsychologists and researchers into psychic phenomena became very interested in the incident. Dr. Marianne Westbrook, a psychologist who specialized in grief counseling, heard about the story and tracked down Patricia Williams for an interview. What she learned was that Patricia and Marcus had been consciously trying to hide their grief that night. They weren't sobbing openly or wearing black armbands or holding signs. They were trying to blend in, to be just another mother and son at a concert. Yet Elvis had seen through that facade immediately. That's what's so remarkable, Dr. Westbrook later wrote in a paper about the incident. Elvis didn't just notice a crying child. He identified the specific nature of that child's grief and pinpointed it to a death that had occurred that very day. That level of perceptual accuracy suggests something beyond normal empathy or intuition. Some people, of course, were skeptical. They suggested that Elvis must have had some kind of inside information, that perhaps someone in his security team had overheard Patricia talking, or that it was all some kind of staged publicity stunt. But these theories don't hold up under scrutiny. Patricia and Marcus had told no one at the arena about Thomas's death. They'd barely spoken to each other, let alone to strangers. And Elvis had nothing to gain from stopping his show to address a grieving family. If anything, it disrupted the concert flow and created an uncomfortable moment for many audience members who'd paid to be entertained, not to witness raw grief. The most compelling testimony came from those who were there that night. Hundreds of audience members over the years have shared their memories of that concert, and their accounts are remarkably consistent. They all describe the same chilling moment when Elvis stopped singing and stared, the same shocking pronouncement, the same sense that something inexplicable had just occurred. Jennifer Martinez, who was sitting 2 rows behind Marcus that night, said in a 2015 interview, "I was 17 years old, and I thought I knew everything. I didn't believe in anything supernatural or psychic, but when Elvis said those words, when that mother screamed, I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I still get chills thinking about it. Something happened that night that can't be explained by normal means." Robert Chen, who was in his 20s at the time and had brought his girlfriend to the concert, recalled, "My girlfriend grabbed my hand so hard when it happened that she left nail marks. We were both just stunned. How did he know?" We talked about it for years afterward, trying to come up with explanations, but nothing made sense. Marcus Williams grew up carrying the memory of that night with him. As an adult, he became a grief counselor himself, specializing in helping children process the loss of parents. In interviews, he's always been thoughtful and measured when discussing that night in 1976. "I don't know how Elvis knew," he says. "I've spent 40+ years studying grief and human psychology, and I still can't explain it, but I can tell you what it meant to me as a 7-year-old boy. It meant that my pain was seen. It meant that my father mattered. It meant that even in the darkest moment of my life, there was someone who cared enough to stop everything and acknowledge what I was going through. That's what changed my life." Patricia Williams kept Elvis's ring for the rest of her life. She never wore it. It was too precious for that. But she kept it in a small velvet box on her dresser where she could see it every day. Before she died in 2003, she gave it to Marcus with instructions to donate it to the Elvis Museum at Graceland after her death, along with the scarf that Elvis had given Marcus. The items are now on display there with a plaque explaining their significance. Marcus followed his mother's wishes, but kept one thing: the concert ticket. The physical ticket that his father had purchased, that had brought him and his mother to the Spectrum that night. That ticket sits framed in Marcus's office, a reminder of the night when grief and music and unexplainable knowing all came together to create something profound. Elvis himself never claimed to have psychic abilities or supernatural powers, but those close to him noted that he had an unusual sensitivity to people's emotional states. Priscilla Presley said in an interview, "Elvis could walk into a room and immediately sense the emotional temperature. He could tell if someone was putting on a happy face, but hurting inside. He was deeply empathetic, sometimes to the point where it was overwhelming for him. He felt other people's pain as if it were his own." Linda Thompson, who dated Elvis in the 1970s, shared similar observations. There were times when Elvis would suddenly become very quiet and withdrawn, and when I'd ask what was wrong, he'd say he was feeling someone else's sadness. He couldn't always explain whose or why, but he'd pick up on emotional energy that the rest of us couldn't detect. That night in Philadelphia might have been the most dramatic example of this sensitivity, but it wasn't the only one. There are other documented instances of Elvis demonstrating unusual perceptiveness about his audience members. In 1974, he reportedly pointed at a woman in a Las Vegas crowd and said, "You just got good news about your daughter, didn't you?" The woman confirmed that her daughter's cancer had just gone into remission. In 1975, he called a man up on stage and told him, "You're worried about your business, but it's going to work out." The man later reported that he had been on the verge of bankruptcy, but his business situation did indeed improve dramatically in the following months. Were these coincidences, lucky guesses? Or was Elvis accessing something deeper, some level of human connection that most of us don't tap into? The scientific community remains divided. Some researchers believe that what Elvis demonstrated was simply highly developed empathy and pattern recognition. Humans leak emotional information through body language, facial expressions, and dozens of other subtle cues, they argue. Elvis, who had spent 20 years reading audiences and connecting with crowds, may have developed an unconscious ability to pick up on these cues with unusual accuracy. Others, particularly those in the field of parapsychology, suggest that Elvis may have been demonstrating what's sometimes called empathic intuition or emotional telepathy. A small but growing body of research suggests that humans may be able to sense each other's emotional states through mechanisms we don't fully understand yet. Perhaps Elvis had a natural gift for this, enhanced by years of intimate connection with audiences. What's clear is that something extraordinary happened that night in Philadelphia. A man looked at a child he'd never met and accurately identified, not just that the child was sad, but the specific reason for that sadness and the exact timing of the event that caused it. Coincidence seems inadequate as an explanation. Luck doesn't account for the specificity and accuracy of Elvis's statement. The legacy of that night extends beyond the mystery of how Elvis knew. It's also about what he did with that knowledge. He could have continued with his show, ignored the crying child, maintained the entertainment value that the audience had paid for. Instead, he stopped everything. He made space for grief in a venue dedicated to joy. He honored a dead man he'd never met. He comforted a child who needed it. He transformed a commercial entertainment event into a moment of genuine human connection and communal healing. That decision, that choice to prioritize compassion over performance, may be even more remarkable than the mysterious knowing itself. Marcus Williams, now in his 50s, still attends Elvis memorial events and gatherings. He often speaks about that night, not as a ghost story or a tale of the supernatural, but as an example of what humans are capable of when we truly see each other. Whether Elvis was psychic or just deeply empathetic doesn't matter as much as what he did with his perception, Marcus says. He saw me, he saw my pain, and he stopped everything to acknowledge it. That's what changed my life. That's what made me want to spend my life helping other people who are grieving. Because I learned that night that being seen in your pain is one of the most healing things that can happen to a person. The mystery of how Elvis knew remains unsolved. Perhaps it always will, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe the real story isn't about explaining the unexplainable, but about recognizing that sometimes, in moments of deep human need, connections happen that transcend our normal understanding of how the world works. Sometimes people see each other across crowded rooms and really know, what the other person is experiencing. Sometimes compassion operates on a level that science hasn't fully mapped yet. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, there's someone like Elvis Presley, who not only senses our pain, but stops everything to hold space for it. June 19, 1976. The night Elvis knew something he couldn't possibly know. The night 18,000 people witnessed something that still can't be fully explained. The night that reminds us that humans are more connected, more capable of profound perception, and more beautiful in their capacity for compassion than we usually give ourselves credit for. If this incredible story moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about the mysterious connections between human beings. Have you ever experienced a moment when someone knew something about you they couldn't possibly know? Tell us in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more unexplained stories about the moments that make us question everything we think we know.